Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Ben Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roan Hunter. Let's jump right in. All right, here we are again for another episode. I think I'm going to try to say the same thing every time this podcast comes on. Here we are again for another intro.
Once again.
It's a little Casey Kasem. Do you remember that guy?
Oh, dude, seriously. Yeah. How do you remember him?
I'm an old soul.
You're too young. You're too young to remember
Here's the request and dedication.
Top 40. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're back in the studio, and the gift we're going to give to the listening audience today is a conversation with Jim Cress. And this guy, when you listen to him talk, you're like, please tell me more. He's just one of those kind of dudes.
Man, Jim is, his background in kind of radio broadcasting, and I think I say it in the episode. I always tell him, Jim, you have such a great face for radio.
This is true.
And I do that to him every time, and I'm sure it's not the first time he's gotten that. But his just listening to him speak, and I've been in many different settings with him. And he's just really one of the best communicators that I've heard, and it's just powerful because it's not just bloviating. Man, there's meat on the bone. It's so good stuff.
Yeah, and so the thing that took me by surprise in this conversation is that he talks about 4 questions and the way that he rolls those questions out, and time frame is banked within there, like as we're entering into a process of recovery, relational recovery of ourselves. And he just seems to be one of those guys that rolls out like, all right, here's where we are. There's a process to get to where we want to be. We got to be honest about the work. Wouldn't you say he's one of those guys?
Oh, man, and he just can do it in such a creative way. And he's got all kinds of Jimisms, as we call them.
Exactly.
I think he talks about it, but he really does. I mean, we have some of them even in our book, and I think I gave him credit for most of them. It's hard because he's got so many.
He does have a lot, yeah. And I can guarantee our listeners this. After this episode, they're going to want to go to the local big box store and buy a hard hat and put some stickers on it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a huge pivotal part of his instructions and stories today. So without further delay, let's give you Jim Cress.
We got a special guest today, one of our dear friends, and certainly somebody that's offered us a lot in our work and in our practice. And we have with us today Mr. Jim Cress. Jim is a former Christian radio broadcaster.
I thought you were going to say former Christian, dude. Well, you got me going. I'm like, I'm sitting here listening. It's good.
Yeah.
It's like the Jim is a former Christian. Like, well,
hey,
okay, some days that's true. Some
Ben,
days that's true.
Edit that part. Edit that where it actually just says Jim is a former Christian.
Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah.
That'd be great. Well, after
continue on, wax eloquent about me, please.
Yes.
I'm listening.
The good stuff. But yeah, Jim has a background in radio. Oh, always I tell him often, man, you just have such a great face for radio.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah,
so kind.
Yeah, and Jim. Out of that, I think he knows everybody in Christendom because I've been with Jim in different settings, and it's like, I mean, he's friends with like the Christian celebrity pastor types.
And I learned a lesson a long time ago about name dropping. Billy Graham. I was actually privately with Billy Graham, and he encouraged me and admonished me not to name drop. So I promised Billy, I call him Billy, that I would not name drop.
Oh gosh, dude, we could do this for like 6 hours or something.
We could take this on the road, actually.
I think so.
Yeah, sure.
Man, I just certainly just for our listeners, Jim is kind of one of the um, key people in the American Association of Christian Counselors. Just we love AACC. Jim is just a huge part of that. Does a lot through that. Also, I'm not violating HIPAA, but he's done a lot of work with Lisa Turkis. Lisa's had him on his. She's the Proverbs 31 woman, or Proverb. What's the name of her ministry?
Proverbs 31 Ministries.
There it is. Yeah,
you're right there.
Yeah, and Lisa's had Jim on her video podcast, and I know you wrote a piece in her book. Is that one released yet, or
It'll be in the fall, called Good Boundaries and Goodbyes. She writes the book, and then every chapter she hands it to me, and I comment on more on the boundary side of things. So it'll be Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, and our video series is simply called Therapy and Theology. So we do the theology side, me, Lisa, and then Joel Mulamale, who's on there, Dr. Joel, and so it's pretty cool mentoring or merging together therapy and theology. And the vision there was a lot of people can't afford therapy, and you and I both know most people statistically don't go to therapy. So they go to YouTube, Therapy and Theology. If they put that in, there's a whole bunch of videos on narcissism and emotional healing, et cetera, et cetera. But it was kind of a pretty cool vision, just to be able to let people get some therapy and tie it into theology as well.
Yeah, man, it is. I would certainly affirm that. Even I've listened to it, and man, it is excellent. Because I mean, a lot of real Christians, they don't believe in that therapy stuff, right? All that psychobabble, man.
That's right.
That's the devil. Yeah. So it is excellent in kind of tying those two together, just kind of integrated. And don't we sing songs about Jesus being the master counselor and wonderful counselor? And I don't know.
Jesus is a wonderful counselor. Whoa, glory, hallelujah. Yeah, that's a real song.
Yeah.
And then it's in Handel's Messiah, and that is true.
Yeah. But it certainly doesn't seem like people think of him in those terms. But as you and I've talked,
what is interesting, Ron? I know you know this, but let's throw a little New Testament Greek at people. Seriously, is the word therapy comes from the Greek word therapeuo, which means I heal or the one who heals. So in the name, it's sometimes our words frame our reality. We're not even looking at the etymology or the understanding of the word. And so when you hear the word therapy, it literally just means healing. We are agents, and you know that we're agents of healing.
Man.
Yeah.
And I know you do, and I've watched you do it, helped you do it, worked with you doing it. This idea of experiential therapy, and man, it is. I certainly I know you know it, believe it, and I do too. That work is so much more powerful and effective than like some just sitting on the couch and cognitively talking about whatever the issue is. Because in that
and Jesus, as you know, was let's call him that. He was a very experiential therapist, healer, person. We know he is God, yes. And so, turning water into wine, the first miracle at the wedding at Cana, of spitting on some dirt and rubbing in a person's eyes, and then the experiential part of really experiential theology, right? Of being baptized in water and healing, and then the new covenant. If you go down and look at things, there were so many things where he was, the loaves and fishes. All of that is experiential. This is not a new modern phenomenon. And we say that anything you can show us, if you come in for counseling, anything you can show us, or anything you can tell us, you can show us. And that's all it is. Such a simple concept. And some people have been over coffee and said, well, let me draw this out on a napkin. They've done it. Everybody does that. Life is experiential, so it's not experiential, although that's in there some, but it's experiential. We're just saying let's let's show this way. And remember, Jesus taught experientially with parables, and the Word of God says, indeed, he never taught without a parable. So that's all that experiential, that story, that narrative, like, oh yeah, there once was a man, there was a rich man, there was Lazarus, and it's all that's experiential.
Oh yeah, man. And I always say, I think one of the greatest examples is the healing of or the kind of restoring healing of Peter after he had
Mm-hmm.
denied Jesus 3 times, and
Yeah,
we all, well, not everybody, but many of us know the story. And Jesus, I guess he could have pulled Peter over behind the boat, right? Like, hey,
yeah,
Peter, I just want you to know, man, I forgive you. But I think Jesus kind of knew the drill, right, man? He knew
yes,
that Peter needed. It was the shame, Peter had denied his, I mean, his dear friend, someone he loved, and Peter was just wallowing in his shame, and man, Jesus does group therapy, right? I mean,
yeah,
and it was experiential. He recreates the exact scene, because we always talk about what is hurt in relationship, has to be healed in relationship, and it has
yes,
to be an emotional experience. And so just Jesus does experiential group therapy right there on the
that's
shore.
right. Love that.
Oh yeah. And so, man, I think you said it. It's not experimental therapy.
Yeah,
Sometimes just even in watching you work, you kind of will. You're kind of like a mad scientist, and you'll just see something in a room, and you go, and man, you grab that thing and you do a piece of work with it, as we call it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's an experience,
Hmm.
and it's just so creative, and certainly I think that's
Yeah,
who Jesus was and what he did. So man, uh, I think you and I, boy, we could chase rabbits, and we could go in 100 different directions,
that is true.
and it would be a lot of fun doing that, and we probably will some, but just and certainly today, and for our listeners, Jim, and just the work that you've done, and and we're not going to do your story. I think your story's out there, like ours is, mine and Eva's, and
Yeah.
I always tell people, just Google my name and you can hear my story. Um, but certainly, you and I both, in recovering from sexual brokenness,
Yep.
that's kind of our preferred term that we use. And I know you use that term too. And because
Hmm.
oftentimes if you say sex addiction or something, that conjures up, the guy at the playground in his trench coat driving around in his ice cream van. Um,
Yeah, you're either a pervert or it's a joke. Like, yeah, I'm a sex addict. And the late night comedians all did that when Bill Clinton's story broke and others.
oh
And
yeah,
it's like, yeah, yeah, I'm a sex addict too. I like lots of sex. So there is a nomenclature you and I would use in the field, of course, as many do, and we understand behind that. It's just why would we ever use the word addiction? You know why, folks? AA found this out. It gives us a system of what to treat. That it's trauma based. It is attachment based. It is, what you don't work out, you'll act out. And it does involve so many neurochemicals in the body that it becomes like an addiction. Like it's obsessive, it's compulsive. You try to stop and you can't. You're hiding secrets. So that's the only word. If we ever use that term, is a medical community still doesn't pretty much recognize the term. So yeah, I'm with you on sexual brokenness or sexual infidelity.
yeah,
Is to like look and say, there's either way, Houston, we've had a problem. I don't care what we call it, but I'm with you. Yeah,
yeah. It's just because I've heard you say it. Words frame our reality, and certainly,
yeah,
if it's a partner, a wife, a spouse, and now you're getting labeled with this idea of like, oh, he's a sex addict. I mean, there's almost a hopelessness associated with that, and so I just think the language is important, and yeah, we will use the term addiction, but it just, all that does is give us a framework. You know, I talk about the idea of, you know, and really, I think when you break it down, you know, what we're dealing with is really a distress reduction behavior,
Yeah.
because you know this stuff started in childhood. So often there's trauma of some form or fashion, and then we figure out, you know, masturbation, pornography, um, but we're also, what we're developing is a very well defined uh, you know, coping behavior. And
Yeah.
so what are we coping with? You know, we're coping with this emotional distress, and we're trying to dissipate that energy of the distress. And so it, these distress reduction behaviors, and when we start working with someone and you look at the, you know, kind of what's going on in their lives when acting out is ramping up, and what we always see, you know, some form of emotional distress. That's
Yeah.
just stress and anxiety, or some life event, some circumstance, and I'm under tremendous distress. And boy, I remember, you know, that old way of coping,
Mm-hmm.
and it works, you know, like a surgeon with a laser scalpel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, um, just you know, question, and as far as like when you kind of get somebody walking into your office, and you know all hell is broken loose, and you've got, you know, two emotionally dysregulated people because everybody's spinning.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I've started even using the term uh, discovery trauma on kind of the addict side of the fence, if you will,
Oh, yeah.
because
Yeah.
you know it's like this thing that I didn't want anybody to know that I was going to take to my grave is now out in the light. You know, the cat's out of the bag, and the
Mm-hmm.
cat's schizophrenic. And but man, I was going to take that to my grave, and now I'm emotionally dysregulated because I didn't have emotional regulation skills to begin with,
That's right. Yeah.
and now my spouse is emotionally dysregulated because she's found out all this information, and now she's dealing with, you know, betrayal trauma, which is very real, and everybody's spinning. And what do you do kind of out of the gate when that shows up in your office?
Well, even as you speak of an emotional dysregulation, think about a heartbeat just in regular rhythm, and it's regulated, or just if you've ever been sick and your body's kind of dysregulated, and you start feeling better and you say, I'm back in that level of rhythm and regulation. What I do, Ron, is I go to ground zero. I literally have a hard hat with a red hard hat with American flag in my office. I point to it. Or I went with a small group of counselors when the towers came down in 2001, and I said, that's where that hard hat came from. And I went in and we were all stunned. Beth Moore was down there. She has a blue hard hat with American flag on in her office or in her home, and she was speaking. Several people spoke during that small gathering, and I went down to a private tour of Ground Zero with her later. From someone who'd heard me on the radio and said, "I'd like to take you back down." And she said, I just feel like I'm over my head right now. And I said, Beth, we're all over our head right now because everybody was. So that level, it's like an analogy to go, we're over our head. But, we went down there and it was silent. We had to look and say, what's it like to look here in ground zero, walking across tangled beams? I did it. Running my hand down the side of a building and just debris and dust. And that was right outside ground zero. And I remember the biggest thing that got me, and I share this with my clients, is I was on the air 3 hours a day as a broadcaster at that time. And I'd watched the news, being a newsman myself, and watched so much of the coverage. But what I couldn't do is the olfactory senses, the smell. And as soon as we went into ground zero, of course, the quiet, the jackhammers, the search and rescue, but the smell was overwhelming. Everything smelled burned, scorched earth, right? And nobody thought we're now going to build one day, which they did, 2 memorials over here. Won't they be beautiful with waterfalls? Waterfalls, been there, saw them. And then one Freedom Tower. Went to the top of the Freedom Tower in 2016 with my entire family. Nobody knew it. We were in a graveyard. We were in an active place. So I say to people, we're at ground zero. Like both of you sitting there, the towers are down. And there is no guarantee, hey, in Jesus' name, we're going to rebuild. I don't know that. So we've got to explore, and you need a guide. You need someone who can help you, and it's going to take some time. Trust will be rebuilt only over time, plus provable, reliable experience. So I start in the mall would be the red dot on the directory, right? You are here. So I do practice to try to get them more emotionally regulated. Maybe I send one of them out and I work with them or see if they have their own therapist. And then we begin to say, I want to get the narrative, the story out. What has happened? Has it been either one of two D days, either discovery or disclosure? And then be able to, as I like to say, tell them, you may not be able to hear it today. I'll tell anybody listening to this podcast. We have more help and hope than you have problems. I got to cast a vision. And yet, so there's the vision. We'll get you through this. I don't have to be an expert in the field, but I have an expertise. We will get you through this. And if you can't see that today, if you want to try to trust me, we'll get you through that. And then we begin, as I've said, you got to collect the dots, then connect the dots, and then correct the dots. We need to go. And then I always look, as you do, we use this thing called a trauma egg, it's their life story in pictures, is I move eventually toward, let's go back before any of this happened and get the story out. Because I need the back narrative of what, I'm like, this just didn't happen out of a vacuum. So there's a back narrative. If it's hysterical, the acting out, it's historical. So that's part of it. That's not done in 1 hour, and you know that. But to begin to get the narrative and slowing everything down and saying, we are here. Mental health is a commitment to reality at all costs. So let me get out of this. And should I forgive him? Like, no, questions not for today. We just got to say, this is where we are and the sacredness of ground zero. That's where I start.
Yeah. We often, we say, I don't know, there's no greater crisis in a marriage relationship than when infidelity, betrayal comes to light, whatever that looks like, whether it's we're on the, I do air quotes, whether it's just porn, because so many guys minimize that, or whether it's an affair, multiple affairs, prostitutes, strip joint, it just, this thing runs the gamut, right? And but it is infidelity, and it is betrayal, and boy, when that hits the table, all hell breaks loose, and it is just, I mean, it's like major crisis mode, and I guess the only thing that I've seen that might come close, well, certainly may surpass that, would be the death of a child. But I mean, it is major crisis level. And so, in some ways, I think we're selling hope,
Yeah.
Just like, man, there is hope. We've been there. We've seen many others get through this and heal from it. And so, boy, but it's touch and go there, for those for however long that time period is, and I think, talk about the idea, Jim, because it's like, early on, with the one that's been betrayed, boy, we've got to comfort that hurt, and I think, that's just a critical first step.
Very much, and I use, you know me well enough that I have all kind of little corny. So many people call them Jimisms now. That's fine. And my HUB, like a hubcap hub, the hub of the very center, is something I just made up one day, and I use it especially with what we call partners, as you and even know, the spouse of, wife of, girlfriend, whoever of a partner of someone who's been unfaithful. And the H is, if I don't do anything else as a therapist. Now I'm talking to both of them, but mainly thinking about the wife or partner. And that is H is, I hear you, because they won't feel heard. Like, yeah, and the other person's over there saying, but at least I wasn't, as you said, like that guy or whatever. And we don't even know if he's fully disclosed yet. H is, I hear you. I want you to know I hear you. U is, I understand you, or I am really trying to understand you. because they feel cray cray up in there. They feel crazy. Many of the partners have told us. It's like, and people aren't going to believe me or thinking you need to forgive him in Jesus' name. So H, I hear you. You is I understand you, and B is I believe you. And I've had more women say to me that that was one of the most helpful things. I mean, she's outed me as her therapist. Lisa Turker's the author and speaker, and she said, and I some days still go, really? She says that was the most helpful thing you did. I mean, in the trenches of working with her, that you said, I believe you, because sometimes a person will feel crazy, and I don't get ahead of them, but I hear you, I understand you, and B, I believe you, and let them get their story out. And I've kind of, as you and Eva do, I keep nuancing and learning. And I hate to tell you, but I do some experimental things, like saying, all right, who died and made a rule that I can't do 3 weeks worth of intensive with some people? They go to treatment, they're there for 45 days, you know that. So that who's made this rule up? And some people, and a lot of times what I've started doing is saying to the partner, here's the deal. Now, we can get into how much money he has spent in his acting out. And by the way, do billable hours of your career. I got it all free porn, or the affair cost me nothing. No, it's cost you a lot. Carnes, the founder of our field, says you have to grieve the loss of the addiction and the many losses of the addiction, or you won't get better. So I'll say, put billable hours, how much time you wasted more time around that addiction than you thought. But I've said so that, recovery requires the three M's, right? It requires money, mucus, you're going to cry, and mystery. The mystery of how do I change? So I'll say with the partners, if I'm working with them, I'm also a certified partner trauma therapist. And I'll say, I'm going to sit with you and let you just process out loud. Yes, I can use EMDR, brain trauma healing science, if you will. But to say, I want you to sit with me, not with him in the room off where he's like, what? Or she, and I'll say, you can cuss in my room. You can say anything you want. I'm going to try not to let you get, massively dysregulated and your anger, but you can get it out. And I sit and I listen with the partner and say, and I do 3 words, tell me more. Or she comes to the end of a narrative, or these words, is there more? So I want to continue to get the pus out of the wound slowly. And sometimes I've taken days, like most of my work now is just intensives, 3 or 4 day intensives. And they come back in and we're processing, letting them get the narrative out because there's a lot in there. We get alarmed as we should with another school shooting here or something else in the news or back to real 9/11 or we're in a COVID pandemic. Still, we're in a mental health pandemic. We're in a porn demic, and people are like, whoa, can you believe that on the news? We need to, in that macro level, go down to the micro level when a woman especially has been betrayed by her spouse, boyfriend, somebody she's in a relationship with, and have the shock and awe there versus, okay, it's like, no, we don't want a laissez-faire approach. And I try to work as you did to get the guy to go, this is an issue. I mean, this is a breaking news. This is a big deal. We've got to take it seriously.
Yeah, you know that I think we've talked about this in using the term partner. I love the way Eva frames it because we've been dealing with this in recovery since 1990, and back then there was just very little help. Certainly on the partner side, nobody was working with that. There was some at that point for on the actor outer side, the addict side, but the evolution in the work with the partners. Eve always talks about when she first showed up, she was a codependent, right? And then that later evolved and she was a co-addict, and
Yeah.
then now it's evolved and now we use the term partner, and a lot of just kind of the evolution of the language. Boy, they the partners, that term co-addict was just, boy, that you get rocks thrown
Yeah.
at you
Yeah.
if you use that today in the counseling office. And then even codependent, but the
Yeah.
way Eva frames that, it's like she always says that I identify with all three, because she says I am codependent. I was a co-addict. I am a co-addict, or can be, and she identifies with that, and she talks about being a co-addict, not necessarily me as her drug, but certainly the relationship, and trying to seek all of her safety in how I was, what I was doing, and how I was acting, and so she just she frames it in the terms she identifies with all three, co-addict, codependent, and partner. And she
Yeah, I
kind of
like that.
yeah, um, and so it just in doing work with the couple, I know you've like talked about the four questions in relationship. Those kind of critical questions in the relationship.
Hmm.
Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, well, I borrow four questions from the book of Nehemiah that, as you know, I've done a lot of teaching on because it's so practical. And so we have, if you look at it, which we will know, of course, not have time to go through the whole thing. We'll get the four questions here real quickly. But the scenario is it's ground zero. The scenario is it's discovery or disclosure in a marriage and a partnership where the walls are down and the gates. I like that the gates are destroyed by fire. The gates of my life, where I let good things come in and back and I communicate in and out. The gates are destroyed, trusting each other. Nehemiah weeps and mourns for days, actually for about 3 months. And then he goes into the king and he says, and somebody asked him, says, "How are we doing there?" He asks his brothers, his brother, and says, "How are things there? What's it like? Let's make the metaphor. What's it like in your marriage right now? We are in great trouble and shame." That's where a lot of people come into our offices. So that's where it starts in Nehemiah. When they're Nehemiah 1, they're in great trouble and shame, and Nehemiah is the cupbearer of the king, so he has an all access pass. He walks into the king, and very interesting, the king does something that I wish more of us did on the friendship level, the pastoral level, the therapy level. And the king looks at him. Nehemiah says he was very much afraid. The king looks at him and says, "Hey, and here are the four questions." He looks and says, "Hey, by the way, in the context, you don't want to come into the king's presence when you're the cupbearer. You don't want to come in looking squirrely or sad." And he says, "Hey," the king says, "I see your face." He notices. "You look sad, and I know you're not sick. This could only be a sadness of the heart." Question number one that I use is to say to any person, "What's up?" Or, "Hey, I see you. What's going on?" See, a lot of times we see a person. "Don't ask that, man. You'll be here all day," or whatever. Or we have a platitude to give them. Question one is, "Hey, I'm curious. What's really going on?" Nehemiah says, "Here's what's going on. It's congruent. What you see is what you get. I am sad because the city, what's the history? Like our family, our lives, our lineage." He said, "The city of my father's graves in my home lies in ruins again, walls down, gates destroyed by fire." Does it make sense, King? This is why I'm sad. Question one is, what's going on? Question two is the scariest question I ever ask in counseling, proven time and time again. C.S. Lewis talked about longing. Jesus talked about it about thirst. So the king says, "Okay, now I see why you're sad. That makes sense. So what are you requesting? What do you want?" I put in there the language of, "So what do you really want?" You see, in therapy, we know this. The presenting problem is seldom the real problem. And Jesus would say, "What are you really thirsty for?" Like the woman at the well again. And the king says, "I hear that." So I say to people, "What do you want?" "I want my marriage to be better." That's it. Or, "I want to stop masturbating to porn." That's it. It's a good thing. What do you really want? Mindful of C.S. Lewis saying, y'all, we're all far too easily satisfied. See, God's made us, designed us to have a holiday at your favorite beach, a vacation at the beach, when we're content to keep making mud pies in a slum. There is a deeper longing, there's a deeper want inside all of us. So the question is not, "What do you want? How can I help?" It's, what do you really want right now? And a lot of times in discovery room, people don't know. And you and I help, and Eva, Jessica is a coach now, my wife. It's like we help people discover what they really, 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 really want. Question one is, what's going on? Question two is, what are you really asking for here? I'll help you because you may not be asking for the right thing. Question three is a classic one, especially in our sexual infidelity healing world. Question 3, and this is about the second biggest question I see in counseling that people struggle with. The king says, all right, now I know what you want. I see why you're sad. How long is this going to take to work on this? How long will you be gone to go rebuild? I know you want to rebuild your marriage, life, whatever. How long is this going to take? It says it pleased the king when Nehemiah set a time. Nehemiah said about this long. It took him 52 days to rebuild that city. And he's with a lot of work. Patrick Carnes, the founder and guru of our field, says still it's probably about a 2 to 5 year plan. If you've had this devastation of betrayal, this is not going to be quick lube. You're not going to go and get an oil change in 10 minutes. So the idea is, how long will it take? Second, will you be committed? This is a journey. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And people will ask us, won't they, how long is it going to take to really work on this?
Oh, yeah.
A long time. In our partner field now, we know now more and more, and I believe it, the data is revealing, and I think it's as much anecdotal as it is empirical data, is it's going to take a lot long for a partner/wife to heal than we knew. It's going to take a long time. Yeah, the nomenclature, co-addict, all that's changing, but you better gear up. And that's the cry of the Old Testament. The number one thing you see in the Old Testament as far as a cry from the heart is, how long, O Lord? So how long is it going to take? Nehemiah set a time. We say, let's just call it, you're in a 5-year journey here, but man, we're going to keep working. We're going to work. We're going to work through this. Question 1, hey, what's going on? Question 2 is, what do you really, really want? Question 3, how long is it going to take to work on this? Question 4, Nehemiah 2. Question 4 is implied, not stated, but fourth question is, what do you need for the journey? What we would call tools of recovery. Nehemiah says, first, I need TSA pre-check. I need clear, if you fly like I do a lot. I need letters to be given to me that say I have the right passage. Just can I have a passport? You can show that says you can get in here. I'm getting ready to go to Canada to lead a group up there. And I have a passport that'll let me get in there and get back home. He said, I need letters, TSA pre-check, that the king says, you're going to go over here, and people are going to go, what you doing coming through here? Here's my letter. Second thing he says, I need the supplies. I need to get to your keeper of your forest, king, who is named Asaph. I need a blank credit card to Lowe's and Home Depot to go in and get, it says the nuts, the bolts, the bars, the timber for the walls we're going to rebuild. We got to rebuild this relationship. The temple, you need a place of worship that I'm going to rebuild, and for the house that I'm going to occupy. So those are 4 questions there, and then it takes time because they have to then get after the rebuilding blow by blow by blow by blow. But you can start with those 4 questions found again in Nehemiah chapter 2.
Well, it is always interesting when you just kind of look at someone and go, what do you want? What do you need? And it's like, I don't know. And, that's just even part of the whole kind of, counseling, coaching, whatever we call this stuff, whatever the stuff we do, it's awareness, right? And so often, I mean, that's on both sides of the fence, of like just this growing awareness and, not only aware of what's going on in the present, but aware of what's going on in front of me and what's going on inside of me. And, all the great, church fathers throughout history talked about, the journey of God is an inward, the journey to God is an inward journey.
That's right.
And when this level of crisis shows up, it is certainly an opportunity for growth into our awareness, who we are, and certainly who God is. Not the church Jesus, but the real one. Those two are very different. And so, we always say, if you trust this process, there is hope. And even if somehow divorce happens, man, this will be the best thing that you've ever done in your own life. And it'll pay dividends for generations.
Well, it cuts the pretense and you second rest of Nehemiah chapter 2 and then moving into 3. But as Nehemiah then goes and he just quietly walks as I did ground zero. And he sees and he goes through the different gates and openings and sees the walls and he's there. And I love it because he went out at night and kept his mouth shut. He said, I told no one, because chapter 1 ends, Nehemiah says, I'm going to go rebuild. he says, and you get to do this. You get to do this, folks. People say, well, Norman Vincent Peale, Joel Osteen, whoever, whatever, is like, you get to say, he said, God, I pray, would you grant us success? I've prayed that with many couples in my office, success in this work, in this intensive. And I need favor before the king. That's in the word of God. Favor's not a new concept. You get to pray that, but then he has to walk and he doesn't blab and tell everybody, I'm in counseling. He keeps his mouth shut, told no one. He walks. He says, I need to walk. And that's what we do with couples. We now need to walk the ground zero of this. And there's 3 ground zeros. Sir, there's your ground zero. That means going back into your life story. Man, there's your back. And that's a Southern thing to say, man, right? It's like to say that a woman, we got to look at your personal ground zero, including your childhood, naming, not blaming, and then the marital ground zero. We need to survey the land and say that, and to walk through the sights, the sounds, the smells, and say, this is as bad as I thought, or it is worse. And a lot of times, the acting out that a guy's done, he's numbed out from reality. Now we're saying, you didn't face your pain and your childhood wounds or whatever, and you numbed out with porn, masturbation, affairs, what have you. Now we're going to take your drug away, no porn, no masturbation, no sexually acting out, and walk you non-anesthesically right into your pain. We don't just take them and put them in a full Nelson and drag them into it, but we're going to say you've wired your brain and body for years, numbing out, usually since some level of childhood, and now no anesthesia, and face your pain to go in. And a lot of recovery, if you'll hear the line, a lot of the healing and recovery, the truth is, a lot of recovery has not been tried and found difficult. No, the truth is a lot of recovery has been found difficult and left untried. There's about a 6-month cliff in. It's in Nehemiah, in moving into chapter 3 and 4. They were halfway through, success was going on, and then they got weak and said, there's still so much rubble to be removed by ourselves, we can't do it, and they got discouraged. So a lot of neurochemistry, like, I'll do anything to save my marriage early on or whatever. And then you see it, Carnes found it about 6 months in, can be like, it's boring. Yeah.
Yeah, this is hard.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, it's interesting, Jim. Like, you know, marriage is on the decline, and you know, we live in the, you know, since the 60s, this idea of, like, you know, free love, free sex, and, you know, whatever you do, it doesn't matter. It's great. But what's interesting to me is this idea, when betrayal happens in a committed relationship, dude, the human response is very consistent. I mean, you've seen it, I've seen it, we see it every day. And, like, okay, if we're, you know, kind of this sophisticated about love and relationships today, why is that so consistent? And even I talk about it, we believe that it is the soul connection that occurs in the physical bonding of sex, and that is just evidence of the God stamp on all of our lives. I mean, we can deny the existence of God, and we can certainly, you know, like, just, you know, not want to be a part of any kind of faith community. And I mean, that makes sense with some of the stuff we're seeing in these organizations and institutions.
Yeah.
However, it's like the reality of God is proven with this betrayal trauma that occurs. It is just so real, and we can try to deny it, but boy, it's just consistent in that response, that reaction that occurs when this stuff shows up.
Yeah, and I love how you've tied even back to the idea with God, because one of the things, if I may riff on this for just a second, is I always tell people, if I am angry at a person, I just don't want to obsess, but I want to always inventory that there's a thread that you have betrayed me, and nobody's getting out alive. We're all been betrayed at some level because it'll just happen in some relationship. And no, I'm not comparing that to the partner trauma on a more large scale. But the idea is a thread running right through you, Ron. You've hurt me. And I always say, well, does the thread run through there and go straight vertical up to God? God, why would you allow this to happen? I think a lot of people miss that God piece, which you've seen it, I'll set a person down in an empty chair in front of them and say, talk to God, like the biblical characters, David, others, even Peter. I mean, give them a break. It's like to sit down and say, yeah, God, you know what? You've allowed this to happen. Why would you do this? Or maybe even now Jim's taking me, Ron's taking me back, Eva's taking me back into my family, looking at childhood. And yeah, why didn't you protect me even from my own mom, dad, family, uncle, whoever? And so that piece is to go, where do I feel the God betrayal? And because I can use the Greek word aphiemi about forgiveness means to cancel the debt. Yes, I say to my clients, many of you are going to have to look at forgiving God. Well, you're using the word forgiving. I know I'm using the Greek word that means to cancel the debt. Well, the Bible says, let God be true and every person a liar. Did God betray you truly? That's not at all what I'm saying. God can handle it. Say, Lord, my experience is I have a story in my head. I feel like you've also betrayed. And God can handle it. He'd rather take that than pretense, walking around all pious or in denial. And God says, I think God looks and says, tell me more. Let's talk. And for me, beautifully pictured in the movie and the book that my friend Paul Young wrote, The Shack. And to go in, when Papa looks at Mac and says, Mac, I'm not who you think I am. And then Paul Young talked about in his own writing of that he had to keep, we've been in a mask society for a while during this pandemic. Paul said, who wrote The Shack, I had to keep taking mask after mask after mask off God and finally give God his face. So that line is to go and say, ultimately, Lord, you've betrayed me somehow. And sometimes there's a lot of resistance. I'll find it's not Christian. I can't think that I don't even look that God's betrayed me. I go, then don't look that you're not ready. But in the end, there's a point. The imprecatory Psalms of David saying basically, God, if I were running the universe, I wouldn't allow this. What are you doing? And David says, oh, you're God and I'm not. But God can take that to look at the betrayal that is more, I call it the pebble in the pond. My spouse has betrayed me sexually. That's the pebble. It goes down, but the ripples can go on to all kinds of things. And I think you just alluded to this, Ron, concluding my point here. I find that this is not, hey, go have an affair or go be in porn. But I know you found that one of the weirdest realities, maybe one of the most wonderful realities, is because this infidelity happened, maybe Genesis 50:20, what someone meant for harm, God meant for good, is it wakes me up and rips the veneer and the shellac off of my maybe fake Christian life or something, that if couples will do the work, like you and Lisa, I know who Eva is, you and Eva have done Sex, God, Chaos, and to work through these things, people would say we were almost, as Jim says, we were more in a mirage than a marriage. I don't want that. And that's prescriptive. No, that's just descriptive. We describe it that, hey, everybody have an affair so you can wake up and have a real marriage. No. But coming out of that is to look and say, we're going to rebuild this Freedom Tower like is down there at Ground Zero, and to say we were living a fake fig leafed up marriage. And that's where we've seen couples have intimacy, relational connection like they've never had before. I know you've seen it too.
Oh yeah. We just talk about our process is kind of this movement from false intimacy to true intimacy. It's the marriage God intended you to have. And, we've seen many, many, many couples not only survive this, but actually thrive. You and I are living examples of that, right? Man, you and Jessica, y'all's relationship, and holy cow, it's a beautiful thing. And Eva and I, and, that stage of life that you and I are both in, Jim, with grandbabies and all that.
Love it. Yeah.
Holy cow. There's nothing better, and, but, we're there in that place because, we were willing to do the work of our recovery, from our sexual brokenness. And, God blessed us. We had two wives that were willing, to do their work, in their recovery. Man, it's just like, if you do this work, boy, it's the abundant life. It's not the perfect life, because life is hard, and marriage is not easy. It's a cat and a dog trying to get along in a dryer running. And so,
well, there's a metaphor.
yeah. But that's, man, you can actually make it work, So, man, I am it's always good to hang out. Like I say, you and I could, we could just do this all day long.
Yeah,
It is fun, and
it is.
it's fun doing life together with people you love.
Yes,
And
amen.
so, man, I certainly appreciate you taking the time and
Thank you.
being on with us, and we will be continuing our ongoing conversations.
Yes.
So, love you, my brother, and
Love you too, buddy.
Enjoy our time together always.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much, Ron.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.